like this thing used to just exist in my head. I wrote it down in a notebook when I was in college, and now it's been consumed by millions and millions of people. So I've always been very aware of the passage of time. But even with that awareness, I was surprised that I was like, I feel like I kind of blinked and I went from 20 to 30.
James, great to be with you today. Really excited to hear more about your journey and how far you've come since building Atlas bars. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'd love to start off with the beginning of your journey. So, when did you initially launch Atlas bars?
I initially launched it exactly 1 week after I graduated from university.
Wow. So, how many years ago was that?
I graduated in 2017. So that was almost, I guess, 8 years ago at this point. My first full year in business was 2018.
And is it worth the journey?
I would say, like most difficult things that I've done, I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I also wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah.
There's this kind of duality where you appreciate it, and it's been extremely enriching of an experience, but it has also simultaneously been the most challenging experience of my life.
What were some of the greatest challenges during this journey?
I think the hardest thing when you're creating something is the act of creation itself, are the first steps. You're taking something that doesn't exist, that only exists in your mind, and you are bringing it into the world. You're basically shepherding it into the world. And that's a challenging thing to do. It's challenging because you need to have the conviction to keep going, even if you're not getting any kind of feedback from the world that this is something that others want. Especially in the early days, you probably won't get much of that unless you have breakout success early on, which is probably not likely. So you need to put in a lot of time to translate this thing that, again, just exists as some synapses firing in your head, just a thought, and you need to manifest that into the world. And that takes time to do. And I think the hardest thing, and I think the thing that stops most people, is the bridge from how do you get this thing from my mind into the world, and that basically crossing that feedback period where you don't really have a lot of external validation, and you have to find a way to keep going even though the world is not yet telling you that this is something that that is wanted.
How did you manage those phases when you weren't getting any external validation from the outside world and yet you continued and you persevered?
I used a lot of different I used a lot of different tools to help me do that, because it's very, in my case, I it's not that I wasn't even getting positive feedback, is that I was actually getting negative feedback from some, like, there are some very smart, experienced people who were less than encouraging when I was starting. One example that I've given is I early on met with one individual who was the former CEO of a Fortune 500 company in the food space. So they understood the space. And I met with them at their house, and they said, "You have no team, you have no experience, you have no money, and you have less than 1% chance of succeeding. In other words, you have a 99% chance that you're not going to be able to do this." And I think that was about a month, maybe a month and a half in to me starting it. So when somebody tells you that, somebody they had actually retired, so they had already gone through their entire career, they had obviously operated at high levels for 30 or 40 years, and I literally was a month into my career. And so when somebody with that level of experience is telling you that, what I thinking back, what I used to keep going despite that was, I just had a belief that what I was doing, there was a place for it. It could be successful. And I kind of fell back on my own intuition, which was that if all of these other things that I knew were lesser kind of options could be successful, then there was no logical reason that this also couldn't be successful. There's just no reason that I could come up with. There's no reason that if all of these other things, all these other brands, products that had features that were less desirable than what I was creating could be successful, then there's just no reason. It was just a question of if I could do it, but it wasn't that the actual product itself or service, whatever, was flawed.
It sounds to me like you had a really, really strong belief in the product itself and that carried you through the hard times.
Yeah, yeah, there was that, and there was also the belief that even though it was very difficult and it was just me, I also had to use a lot of tools for myself to help propel me to continue to go, because there's nobody I could have stopped at any time. There's nobody that was telling me to do this in the initial 3 or 4 years. In the first 3 or 4 years, there was no investors. I could have stopped at any time. I could have stopped and shut it down and just said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And so the person that was driving me was myself, and I had to use a lot of different tools in order to basically wake up every day and be like, yep, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
What were some of those tools that you used on yourself to keep yourself sort of motivated or keep yourself to persevere?
I think if I had to answer it in a word, it would be perspective. And what I mean by that is I would use a number of different tools that I would come across that I would use to basically reframe my what I had to do as something that instead of this is like a challenging thing that you have to do, I would reframe it as like, no, this is a challenging thing that you have the opportunity to do. And a couple of examples that I can think of. One example is I had a above my bed. So in World War II, when the Allied troops landed on the northern shores of France on D-Day, they landed on these boats, and they basically had to storm these cliffs that had a lot of German entrenchments in them. And there's a famous picture taken from one of the, I think it's one of the American boats, and it's from the perspective of the boat looking up at the cliffs. And I would use that, and it was literally above my bed, so I would see it when I woke up every day. And I would use that to tell myself, well, if you were born probably 70 or 80 years ago, there's a very good chance that you could have been on one of those boats, and you weren't born 70 or 80 years ago. You were born 20 years ago. So you have the opportunity that many, many people did not have, and you were lucky to be born into the time and the place that you were born. So you should be grateful for that opportunity and make the most of it. So I kind of use that for like what I would call temporal perspective, making myself like, hey, you're in the 21st century. This is arguably, and I think almost objectively, the best time to be alive in human history if you look at all of the statistics and quality of life. And so I would use something like that to be like, yeah, you've like the people who all the thousands of years of humans who came before, they did not have the opportunities that you have today. Like if I was born 500 years ago, my options probably would have been like a blacksmith, a farmer, or a cobbler. Like you got three things you could do depending on where your village is and what's available to you. And those things probably weren't even guaranteed. And today, there's just such an explosion, such a plethora of opportunities that are available to us that were never available to before. But if you're only born into that world, then you can just take it for granted, and you cannot realize how truly like amazing it is that we have all of this opportunity. So that was one thing. And then another thing that I used was I would drive I drove Uber to fund the company early on. So I would get up early, I would drive Uber. I would also do it at night, and I would talk to a lot of the people that I was driving, not like an annoying way. I would just be like, hey, how's it going? And if somebody if somebody just offered something up, then we would have a conversation. And the cool thing about that is that you get to talk with, it's such a random sampling of people across society. Like you can talk to somebody who's the CEO of a large company, you can talk to somebody who has just arrived in the country. Like it's truly just a complete cross section of the people in the country. And so I particularly like talking to people who were not born in the States and who had come to the States, because it gave me, I think, perspective and appreciation for being born into a place that has the opportunities that the United States has. Like a lot of people I would talk to them and they would just tell me about kind of the sacrifices that they had made to try and get here so that they could, like a lot of people, a surprising number of people that I remember speaking to, their families were in the countries that they had come from, and they had moved to the States to basically work so they could make money that they would then send back home. And again, just like with the time aspect of it, when you're born into a place, if you've always lived in that place, it's very hard to have perspective of not living there because you have nothing to compare it against. So because I was born in the US, I would basically almost like vicariously use these other people's experiences to make myself, again, appreciative for it. So between those two things, between the time aspect of it and the place aspect of it, I just really reframed my perspective. And though it was very challenging, I tried to remind myself every day that it's challenging and it's hard, but it's something that you get to do, and it's an unbelievable opportunity that you have. So just try and make the most of it.
Beautiful. And I've had similar realizations, and also about what you said, taking things for granted, being born and raised in Europe. But then I had friends that were from the outside and really struggled with visas and all these different things. And then you think, wow, I totally took this for granted. And so realizing the luck that you have and actually utilizing that opportunity. When was the moment where you felt, okay, finally, all of this hard work, all of this effort is really starting to pay off?
I don't know if there's ever a specific moment. I remember that my initial goal when I was starting it was I just wanted to be able to have a company that would give me freedom, that would allow me to have control over my own time. So I wouldn't have to effectively rent my time to somebody else in order to make ends meet. So that was my initial goal. And then I remember when I was driving Uber and still doing the company, I was like, man, if I didn't have to drive Uber and I can just work on the company, that would be great. That would be awesome if I could, yeah, just do that. And I think now I'm just very, very grateful that I'm able to basically have a life that I I want. And all I really all you really do, especially if you're like a knowledge worker, is you just sit at a sit at a computer and just move things around on a screen. And again, just giving historical perspective, that's it's really an unbelievable thing when you think about it, because for 99% of human history, you would have had to do some pretty strenuous physical labor in order to just make in order to really exist and survive. And the fact that we can now do that just by sitting in an air conditioned room and moving pixels around on a screen is pretty incredible. And so I don't know if there was a specific moment that I was like, wow, this has paid off. Or if it's really just a gratitude that every day where I'm like, man, this is pretty cool.
Do you feel that you have the freedom of time that you wanted initially?
Yeah, I do think so, especially when I speak with my friends that are in more, I guess, traditional or corporate settings, and they have to do things like you have to take days off, you have to submit to HR or whoever to say, hey, I want to take these 2 days off. I probably take fewer days off than a person who's working in a more structured environment, but I also just have much more flex. I don't feel that I need to take a lot of time off, and when I do, I just I can go somewhere in the middle of the day without worrying about how that's going to be perceived by somebody else, or I can travel on a Friday without having to announce it to somebody. So ironically, I think I probably take fewer days off than people who have to tell people they're taking days off. But it it just doesn't feel, because I really enjoy what I do. I don't feel that I need a tremendous amount of time to step back and recharge. Though I will take it if I feel I need it.
That makes sense. And have you gone back to see that person that initially told you that you would fail 99% to tell him that you made it in that 1%?
Yeah, they ended up being an investor.
The
Yeah.
irony of fate, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I just in that case I just kept them updated. I just kept them updated every couple of months. I would send them an update. And then after about a year and a half of doing that, they were actually the first person that proposed they actually led, ironically, they led the initial investment into the company.
How do you feel about that when you look back at your journey and you look back at maybe how hard it was when you first started to how far you've come?
It's it's pretty surreal. It is. I think anybody who's created something, it's a very unique feeling when something did, as I mentioned earlier, when something did just exist in your head, and it's gone from existing in your head to actually being interacted with and used by people and by a lot of people. It's an odd, it's an like a kind of out of body feeling when you really stop and think about it. Like, this thing used to just exist in my head. I wrote it down in a notebook when I was in college, and now it's been consumed by millions and millions of people. It's really cool. Yeah, it's really cool, and I think it's one of the I think like most unique and cool things that we can do as humans is you can create something that is then useful to other people. And yeah, I think it's a really cool feeling. It's almost like, I would almost say it's like some parts of it are like almost spiritual in that it does make you feel connected to people because you created this thing that now all these other people depend on and enjoy on a daily basis. Yeah, it's a great question. I've never really had to articulate an answer to it before, but it's a really cool feeling.
And I agree with you. I think the business is a spiritual experience in the sense that you connect with yourself, what truly sort of matters to you, and you connect at a large on how you can make an impact on other people. And so, from that perspective, there's this sort of in depth connection, which many people lack. Sometimes in corporate environments, obviously not everyone, but sometimes people lack this meaning when they feel they're just a pawn in the in the structure. But in really good companies with great company culture, they have this entrepreneurial spirit where people get to experience this same sort of reward, but the connection in that case is in the company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It seems, again, just from my own reflections and from having worked with or having talked with so many of my friends, that uh, what matters, it doesn't seem that it really matters whether it's a larger or smaller organization. It seems like what matters is whether or not people think what they do has an impact, and whether or not they perceive. And it's interesting because it doesn't really seem like it matters what's objectively true. It seems like what matters more is how people perceive their own contributions, the impact of their own contributions to be. And I think what you said, a lot of people, I think it's easier to become kind of disillusioned and jaded in a larger company because you can just think, well, if I stop showing up tomorrow, it really wouldn't have any impact on the bearing of this company. But as you said, I think a lot of companies, you can work around that, and you can create these kind of like microcosms of like entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial experiences that help to combat that feeling and show people that, yeah, you might, if you're in a 100,000 person organization, that might be true as with the organization as a whole, but within your team, within your group, that's certainly not the case. And I think, yeah, just like you can view your team as like a little company, because it effectively is.
Exactly. And what still drives you today? So now that you've achieved what you've achieved so far and you've sold the bars to millions of people, and what continues to sort of drive you?
That's a good question. I think what continues to drive me is I view companies as vehicles for solving problems. They're really just when you think of the difference between different organizations, like a nonprofit or a company, uh, really the only difference a nonprofit exists to solve issues, but it's usually reliant upon outside capital in order to continue to exist. And a company also can solve problems, but it theoretically is self-sustaining because it's able to generate enough capital to continue to exist. And I think that once I realized that oh, a company is really just a way to it's kind of a self-sustaining way to solve a problem. And if you can identify a problem that matters and that's worth solving, then you can basically create a an organization that can solve it in perpetuity, so long as that organization is self-sustaining. So, what continues to drive me is just thinking about okay, what other problems do I feel that I have the ability to help solve, given the way that I think, what my abilities are, and how can I leverage everything I have to solve those problems. So I've always loved making things. I've always loved problem solving, and really just I want to continue doing that for as long as I can.
Problem solving, solving real issues that you see. Have you considered having other companies solve different issues or just expanding your current business?
All of the above. Yeah, all of the above. Um, yeah, because it's so I turned 30 this year, and it does. I was very, very, very aware of how quickly time goes. I've always been extremely aware of the passing of time, and almost a like one of my core memories. I remember when I was 5 at my fifth birthday party. I remember somebody saying to me, "You're halfway to 10." And I remember when I was 5, I was like, "Wow, that's true. I'm almost in the double digits." And then I remember I think I was in the third no, I was in the second grade. So I was in the second grade, so I was about 7. And my high school graduation year was 2013. And so we all signed a shirt when we were in second grade. So like 11 years before we graduated, that had our graduation year on it. And I remember being like, that year is going to come up quick. So I've always been very aware of the passage of time. But even with that awareness, I was surprised that I was like, I feel like I kind of blinked and I went from 20 to 30. And so the reason I say that is because uh, I just feel almost like an urgency to continue to try and solve different things. And I think now it's easier more than it ever was before to have multiple organizations just with the tools available, so long as you're able to kind of like cognitively process it.
Yes, that's so long that you can cognitively process it is
Yeah.
actually a pretty important factor, I'd say. What inspired you in the first place to be in this nutrition space? Why did you go down that route of the nutrition space?
I always was really interested in the relationship between what you consume and what impact it has on your body. Again, I remember one of my core memories. I think I was 4 for this one, and my parents told me that if you eat carrots, it'll help improve your eyesight. And I remember that stuck with me, and I was like, oh, that's really cool. That by choosing what I put in my body, it can actually improve what my body is able to do. And then I thought of the analogy of like it's cool that like imagine if I was given a car like a Toyota Corolla or something like that, and just by the choices that you made for that car, you could turn that Corolla into a Porsche. I was like, that's a really cool idea, and obviously you can't do that with a car, but you can effectively do that with the human body. You can, through the choices that you make, through how you move your body, through what you put into your body, you can dramatically improve what your body is able to do. So because of that idea, I was always just really interested in nutrition, and I thought about it a lot. And that gave me, because I thought about it a lot, I had the basis, like the nutritional background, to be able to design a product that was in that space. So really, my curiosity just kind of gave me a good basis for nutritional understanding, and then I was able to use that understanding to create something that I thought would be useful to other people.
I mean, following our curiosity and what really interests us generally leads to pretty interesting routes. And it's one of the things that I've seen with successful entrepreneurs. So, problem solving, like you said, but also this thirst and curiosity and desire to learn. And then when you have all of that, it leads generally to a product or a service or something that you can then give back to the world because you accumulate knowledge, understanding, interest, ability, skills. And then generally, it makes more sense if you use them for others, not just for
Yeah.
your own personal curiosity, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't, I don't know if curiosity is something that, I don't know if it's something that can be really um, like trained in another person. I, I just know for myself, I've always just kind of wondered about things, but I don't know if it's possible to, I guess you could encourage it. You could like cultivate that in someone else. You could encourage them, and just maybe over time they would be able to start thinking on their own. But I think what curiosity really does is it basically causes you to always be in a classroom, because you're always just wondering as you move through the world. You're always like, huh, I wonder about that. Like, I can give you an example from this past weekend. My mind just does it automatically. I was actually sitting at a wedding and a helicopter flew overhead, and I was looking at the helicopter, and I was like, that's interesting that the blades that turn horizontally, they control kind of the vertical motion of the helicopter, and the blade on the back that is on the kind of the tail of the helicopter, that controls lateral movement. So both of those just control 1 degree of motion, up and down and then side to side. But if you combine them together, you can basically move in any direction. You can move diagonally, you can move basically 360 degrees. And I was just sitting in a wedding. I was looking at a helicopter, and then I thought through all of that. And so then I wrote that down. And so that just happened completely naturally. But I don't know if it's possible to, I don't know if it's possible to teach that.
I mean, I think we can improve any sort of skill. So, probably people who aren't curious could become more curious. But what often happens is they're not interested in it because they don't see what they're lacking by not being curious. And they don't see that they're not curious. If you know what I mean,
Yeah.
it's like a blind spot. This is one thing I often reflect on with leaders who lack self awareness. They often aren't aware that they have low self awareness. So why would they work on increasing their self
Right.
awareness? It's a bit of a vicious cycle. But it is both self awareness and curiosity are obviously so important when you run your own business and just in general in life to sort of be fulfilled and happy.
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're so right that you can't improve what you don't know you need to improve. It reminds me of like another thing that I've used for myself, um, as a kind of a reinforcement of that idea, is that when I was young, I always just really disliked running, and we had to do the mile run when I was in school. It was, I think, a government program where you had to do the mile run every year for a fitness test, and I would always hate it because it was in the fall and it would just be so like painful for me. And I didn't realize until much later when I was diagnosed that I had asthma, and that's why it was so painful for me. But I didn't know that I had asthma because I only have one set of lungs, and you can't put yourself in somebody else's lungs. So when I would run and it felt like I was drowning, I just assumed that everybody else also felt that way, that everybody else felt like they were drowning. And I was just like, I guess this is what it feels like to run, and everybody else must experience the same discomfort, and nobody else is saying anything. So I guess this is just what you do. But similar to To your point on the self awareness, if you don't have anything to contrast your own experience with, it's very hard to become aware of that specific experience.
Absolutely. What would you say to founders, entrepreneurs who are listening, and maybe they're going through a rough time, maybe they even hit rock bottom? You've experienced, several moments like this, I know, in your own journey. What would you tell them if they're listening or watching this today?
I would say time and time again, it I've gone through some rough patches for sure. And when you're in those patches, it can just feel like the entire world is crashing, and it can just feel like you're completely alone. You're in a it really feels like what I would call like a kind of a sunken place. Like I would when I've been in those situations, it feels like you're almost wearing, for me, it feels like you're wearing kind of sunglasses and everything just appears tinted and darker and worse. And it's really hard to think that this is temporary because it's all consuming. It's your entire experience at that point in time. And it's really, again, coming back to perspective, it's really hard to believe. You can tell yourself that, hey, this is temporary, this too shall pass, all of that. But it's really hard to get yourself to believe it when your entire experience at that point in time is in that kind of dark place. So um, it sounds like trite and it sounds cliche, but the sun always does shine and the light always does come back. So it really is temporary, and I can say that with 100% confidence based on my own experiences, that there's never been, I don't know how many times experiences like that have happened to me, but there's never been a time where it hasn't passed.
Hmm. Yeah, beautiful. I resonate with that. And it's true what you said that when you hit rock bottom and you go through hard times, it feels like it'll be forever. And I also tried to say this too shall pass. And what helped me in those moments was just try to make it a little less heavy in whatever way in our mind, the perspective, like you said, gratitude, appreciating small things here and there, just to sort of make the dark glasses a little less dark. And then at some point, something shifts. And what's interesting, I wonder if you resonate with this, is sometimes nothing shifted externally. So sometimes the situation stayed the same, whether it's the sales that you're making or the business status, but something inside you just flips. Whether it's you suddenly feel really grateful that you're on this journey, or you reconnect in some ways, or maybe you just got more rest. But sometimes you just like shift within, and as of then, everything changes, and then it changes externally because then you're in a better place, and then it leads to the results. I wonder if you
Yeah,
resonate with this.
yeah, totally. It reminds me of one of my a story that really helped me a lot. It's I believe it's a Chinese parable called the farmer and the horse, and it's exactly that, where basically this farmer, he has his horses. One of his horses runs off, and his neighbor says to him, "That's awful. Like, you lost your horse." And the farmer just says, like, maybe. And then the next day, that horse comes back with a bunch of other horses. And so his neighbor's like, "That's great. You got all these other horses." And he's like, "Yeah, maybe." And then his son is like riding one of the horses, and his son falls off and breaks his leg. And again, his neighbor's like, "That's awful. He broke his leg." And he's like, "Maybe." And then the army comes and they're looking to conscript people into service, and his son can't get conscripted because he's injured. And so basically, the point of it is that you can't really judge anything that happens as good or bad without without any context, because at that point in time when the thing is happening, you don't have you don't have the perspective necessary to really assess the impact that it is going to have on your life. And I can say for myself that some of the things that have in the moment seemed as if they were quite literally the worst thing that have ever happened to me have ended up being probably some of the best things that have happened to me. But you don't know it when you're going through it. You really don't.
Absolutely. James, thank you so much for being on the show today. Thank you so much for sharing so vulnerably your story, your journey, the lessons you learned along the way. It's been such a joy to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was great talking.